My wife mocked love really is blind. I married you in front of her friends. I filed for divorce revenge and opened her eyes to single life alone. When they take your vulnerabilities and weaponize them for cheap laughs? That's exactly what happened to me on a Thursday evening that changed everything. My wife had invited her usual crew over for women who'd been friends since college, all married, all seeming to compete over who had the most dramatic stories to share. I was playing the good husband, making sure everyone had their drinks refilled, bringing out the cheese board she'd insisted on buying. The conversation had been typical: work complaints, gossip about mutual acquaintances, the usual stuff. I was heading back to the kitchen when I heard my wife's voice get louder, that tone she used when she was about to deliver what she thought was a killer punchline. You know what they say, girls, love really is blind. I mean, look at my husband over there. She gestured toward me with her wine glass, and all four women turned to stare. I actually married that. Proves the saying right, doesn't it? The kitchen fell dead silent. Not the kind of silence where people are thinking of comebacks, but the kind where everyone suddenly realizes they've witnessed something they shouldn't have. I stood there holding a bottle of wine, watching four faces that couldn't quite decide between nervous laughter and secondhand embarrassment. My wife, however, seemed to think she'd landed a home run. She took another sip of her wine, completely oblivious to the fact that even her friends looked uncomfortable. One of them, the redhead who usually laughed at everything, just stared into her glass. Another one cleared her throat and tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. My own wife had just used my appearance as entertainment for her friends, had just reduced me to a punchline about how she'd settled for less, in my own house, while I was serving her guests like some kind of waiter. She felt entitled to humiliate me. I didn't explode. I didn't storm out or start a scene. Instead, I finished pouring the wine I'd brought out, set it on the counter, and calmly walked upstairs. Behind me, I could hear forced conversations starting up again, but the energy in the room had shifted completely. In our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the reality of what had just happened sink in. This wasn't the first time she'd made comments about my appearance. There had been little digs, here and there over the years, usually disguised as jokes or said when she was frustrated about something else. But this was different. This was public humiliation delivered with the confidence of someone who thought I'd just take it. 20 minutes later, she knocked on the bedroom door. She didn't wait for an answer, just walked right in with that same entitled energy she'd had downstairs. "Are you seriously going to be dramatic about this?" she said, crossing her arms. "It was just a joke. The girls thought it was funny." I looked at her standing there, wine glass still in hand, no trace of remorse on her face, just annoyance that I dared to have feelings about being publicly humiliated. "Did they?" I asked quietly, because from where I was standing they looked pretty uncomfortable. She rolled her eyes. "You're being way too sensitive. It's not like I said anything that wasn't true." And there it was. Not only had she humiliated me in front of her friends, but she was doubling down on it, making it clear that in her mind I deserved it. That my feelings about being treated like garbage in my own home were invalid because she decided I was overreacting. I didn't argue with her. I didn't try to explain why what she'd done was wrong. Because at that moment, I realized something important. Someone who truly loved and respected me would never have said those words in the first place. And someone who did would be horrified by their own behavior, not standing there defending it. The women downstairs left about an hour later. I listened to their cars pulling out of the driveway, knowing that tomorrow they'd be texting each other about what they'd witnessed, knowing that my humiliation would be dissected and discussed over coffee and lunch plans. My wife came back upstairs around midnight, expecting everything to be back to normal, expecting me to have gotten over it, moved on, pretended it never happened. She climbed into bed like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. As I lay there in the dark listening to her fall asleep next to me, one thought kept running through my head: she'd shown me exactly how much respect she had for me. And more importantly, she'd shown me exactly how much respect I'd been showing myself by tolerating it. I woke up at 5 in the morning with absolute clarity. Not the kind of restless awakening you get after a bad night, but the sharp awareness that comes when your mind has been working while you slept. I'd spent years making excuses for her behavior, years telling myself that her comments were just her way of dealing with stress, or that she didn't really mean them. But last night had stripped away every excuse I'd ever made. I got up quietly, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. For the first time in our marriage, I started documenting, not just last night's incident, but everything I could remember. The time she'd criticized my clothes in front of her sister. The way she'd introduced me to her CO workers is not much to look at, but he pays the bills. The constant little corrections about how I spoke, how I stood, how I existed in spaces she deemed important. Writing it all down was like looking at a map of systematic disrespect that I'd somehow learned to navigate around instead of addressing head-on. By 7, I had 3 pages filled with incidents I'd previously dismissed as isolated events. They weren't isolated. They were a pattern of someone who felt entitled to diminish me whenever it served her purposes. She came downstairs around 8, already dressed for work, moving through her morning routine like yesterday had never happened. She poured her coffee, checked her phone, grabbed her keys, the same performance she'd given me every weekday for 5 years. "You're up early," she said without looking at me, already scrolling through her messages. "Couldn't sleep." "Well, hopefully you're over whatever mood you were in last night. I'm having lunch with the girls today, and I don't need you being weird about a harmless joke." There it was again. Harmless joke. As if my feelings about being publicly humiliated were the real problem here. As if her concern was how my reaction might affect her social plans, not whether she'd hurt someone she was supposed to love. "Enjoy your lunch," I said. She finally looked up from her phone, sensing something in my tone she couldn't quite place. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means enjoy your lunch." She stared at me for a moment, probably waiting for me to elaborate or start an argument she could dismiss. When I didn't, she shrugged and headed for the garage. The door slammed with more force than usual. After she left, I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First to my bank to understand exactly what assets we had in joint accounts. Then to a friend who'd gone through a divorce 2 years earlier. He gave me the name of his attorney and some practical advice about protecting myself financially. The attorney's office could see me that afternoon. I spent the morning gathering documents. Bank statements, property deeds, insurance policies, tax returns, everything laid out in neat folders like I was preparing for a business meeting. Because that's exactly what this had become. A business decision about whether I was going to continue accepting treatment that no business partner, friend, or stranger would tolerate from me. The attorney was a woman in her 50s who'd clearly heard every story there was to hear. She listened without judgment as I explained the situation, nodding occasionally, taking notes. "Has there been physical violence?" she asked. "Substance abuse? Just social drinking? Financial infidelity, hidden debts, or accounts? Not that I know of." She set down her pen and looked at me directly. "So, you're here because you're tired of being treated poorly." "I'm here because I realize that someone who respects you doesn't humiliate you for entertainment." "That's a fair reason," she said. "Probably the best reason, actually. Most people wait until there's cheating or money problems. You're addressing this while you still have your self-respect intact." We spent the next hour going through options, timelines, what to expect. She explained community property laws, spousal support possibilities, the process of filing. Everything was straightforward when you removed emotion from the equation. "One piece of advice," she said as I was leaving. "Don't announce your intentions until you're ready to follow through completely. And don't let anyone convince you that wanting to be treated with basic respect is asking for too much." I got home before she did and put all the documents away in a safety deposit box I'd opened that afternoon. Then I sat in the living room, exactly where I'd been humiliated 12 hours earlier, and waited. She walked in around 6 with shopping bags and the satisfied expression of someone who'd had a good day. Her friends had probably spent lunch reassuring her that I was being too sensitive, that men don't understand women's humor, that I'd get over it like I always did. "How was your day?" she asked, setting her bags down. "Productive?" "Good. I got you something." She pulled a polo shirt from one of the bags. "The girl said this color would look better on you than what you usually wear." She handed it to me with a smile, as if this was some kind of peace offering, as if the problem was my wardrobe and not her behavior, as if getting her friends' input on how to improve my appearance was thoughtful, rather than another layer of humiliation. I held the shirt for a moment, looking at this woman who thought the solution to publicly mocking her husband was to buy him clothes her friends had approved. "Thanks," I said, and folded it neatly on the coffee table. She seemed to expect more enthusiasm, more gratitude for her gesture. When she didn't get it, her smile faded slightly. "Are you still upset about last night?" "No," I said. "I'm not upset anymore." And I wasn't. Upset implied emotion, implied that I still expected better from her. What I felt now was something much colder and more final. I felt resolved. The next few days fell into a strange rhythm. She acted like everything was normal, chattering about work drama and weekend plans while I responded with just enough engagement to avoid suspicion. But underneath the surface, I was methodically preparing for what came next. I'd taken 2 personal days from work to handle the legal paperwork. Everything was moving faster than I'd expected. The attorney had been right about having my documentation in order. Clean finances and a clear pattern of emotional abuse made the process straightforward. On Saturday morning, while she was at her yoga class, I was transferring important files to a secure cloud account when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She'd forgotten it, rushing out the door to meet her instructor. I wasn't the type to go through someone's phone, had never felt the need to check up on her or invade her privacy, but the notification was visible on the lock screen, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A group chat called Wine Night Girls with a message preview that showed my name. I picked up the phone. The message was from yesterday, and even in the preview, I could see enough to know I needed to see the full conversation. Her passcode was our wedding anniversary. Of course it was. The messages from Thursday night were all there. Right after her friends had left, she'd immediately opened the group chat and shared what she called the highlight of the evening. She'd actually typed out what she'd said about love being blind and marrying me, adding laughing emojis and saying her friends' reactions were priceless. But it got worse. One of her friends had replied asking if she was serious or just being dramatic. Her response, dead serious, I mean, look at him. But he's stable, and he worships the ground I walk on, so whatever. Another friend had sent a crying laughing emoji and said, girl, you are savage. Poor guy, she'd replied. He'll get over it. He always does. It's not like he has options anyway. I scrolled through more messages. This wasn't an isolated incident. There were months of conversations where I was the running joke. Comments about my appearance, my social skills, my family, screenshots of texts I'd sent her that she'd shared for them to mock, pictures of gifts I'd given her with captions about how sweet but clueless I was. The worst part wasn't the cruelty. It was the casual nature of it. The way she discussed me like I was some pathetic character in a sitcom they were all watching together. Like my feelings were irrelevant, because she'd decided I was too grateful to have her to ever do anything about her behavior. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to an email account I'd created specifically for documentation. Then I deleted the evidence that I'd been in her phone and put it back exactly where she'd left it. When she got home an hour later, sweaty and cheerful from her workout, I was sitting in the same spot reading a book. How was your morning? She asked, heading straight for the refrigerator. Quiet. Good book. She grabbed a water bottle and leaned against the counter, looking at me with what I now recognized as mild amusement, like I was a pet that had learned a new trick by not causing problems about Thursday night. I was thinking we could go to that new restaurant tonight, the one downtown you mentioned wanting to try. It was a nice gesture, or it would have been if I hadn't just read her describing me as someone with no options who would always get over whatever she did to me. Now, it felt like a reward for good behavior, a treat for the pathetic husband who'd accepted his public humiliation without too much fuss. Sure, I said. Sounds good. She smiled and headed upstairs to shower. I listened to her moving around up there, humming to herself, completely unaware that her casual cruelty had been documented and was now sitting in a lawyer's file. That afternoon, I met with the attorney again. She reviewed the screenshots with the same professional composure she'd shown during our first meeting, but I caught her shaking her head slightly as she read. This actually strengthens your case significantly, she said. These messages show a pattern of deliberate emotional abuse and public humiliation. They also demonstrate that she views the marriage as transactional and has no respect for you as a person. How long before we can file? I can have the papers ready by Tuesday. Do you want to proceed with service? Yes. Any preference on timing or location? I thought about that group chat, about months of being their entertainment, about how confident she was that I'd never stand up for myself because I supposedly had no other options. I want her served next Thursday evening around 7. The attorney looked up from her notes. Any particular reason for that timing? She's hosting wine night again. Same friends, same routine. I want them all to see exactly what happens when someone finally stops tolerating her behavior. A small smile crossed the attorney's face. I can arrange for that. The process server will need the exact address and a confirmation that she'll be home. She'll be home. She never misses an opportunity to entertain her audience. That evening, we went to dinner as planned. She was in a particularly good mood, probably still riding the high from her friend's positive reactions to Thursday's humiliation. She talked about work, made plans for next weekend, discussed a vacation she wanted to take in the fall. I listened and responded appropriately, but I felt like I was watching her performance from a great distance. Every smile, every laugh, every casual reference to us and our future felt hollow when I knew how she really saw me. At one point, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm glad you're not being weird about Thursday anymore," she said. "I knew you'd realize it wasn't a big deal, right?" "Not a big deal at all." She squeezed my hand and launched into a story about her co-worker's relationship drama. I nodded in the right places and made appropriate comments, but my mind was on Tuesday's meeting with the lawyer, on the papers being prepared, on next Thursday evening, when her entertainment would finally have consequences she hadn't anticipated. For the first time in days, I felt genuinely relaxed, not because I was looking forward to hurting her, but because I was finally taking action that aligned with my self-respect. I was finally behaving like someone who understood that love without respect isn't love at all. Tuesday came and went without incident. The papers were signed, filed, and ready for service. I went through the motions of normal life while carrying the weight of what was coming. She remained blissfully unaware, planning Thursday's wine night with the same enthusiasm she always showed for her favorite form of entertainment. By Wednesday, I could tell she sensed something different about my energy, but she couldn't place what it was. I wasn't angry or sulking. I wasn't giving her the cold shoulder or trying to punish her with silence. I was just detached, pleasant, but distant, like a polite stranger sharing the same space. "You've been quiet lately," she said over dinner Wednesday night. "Just thinking about some things. Work stuff, among other things." She waited for me to elaborate, but when I didn't, she moved on to discussing Thursday's plans. The same 4 friends were coming over. She'd bought wine, planned appetizers, even cleaned the house more thoroughly than usual. "You don't mind making yourself scarce again, do you?" she asked. "The girls like having their space to talk." "Of course not. I wouldn't want it to interfere with your conversations." Thursday evening arrived with perfect timing. Her friends showed up right at 6:30, just like always. I could hear them settling into the living room, the same space where I'd been humiliated exactly 1 week earlier. Their voices carried that familiar energy of women ready to dissect everyone and everything in their social circle. I stayed in the kitchen, playing the same role I'd played the week before. Dutiful husband, making sure drinks were filled and snacks were available. But this time, I was watching the clock. The process server would arrive at 7 sharp. At 6:55, I excused myself and went upstairs. I didn't want to be in the room when it happened, but I wanted to hear every word. I positioned myself at the top of the stairs where I could listen without being seen. 7 o'clock came and went, then 7:05. I was starting to wonder if something had gone wrong when the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," my wife called out, probably expecting a late arrival or someone making a delivery. I heard her footsteps in the hallway, the sound of the front door opening, and then a professional, male voice. "Are you Mrs. Johnson?" "Yes, that's me. You've been served. Have a good evening." The silence that followed lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then I heard paper rustling as she presumably opened the envelope and began reading. More silence, then a sound I'd never heard from her before. A sharp intake of breath that sounded almost like a gasp. "What's wrong?" one of her friends called from the living room. "Who was that?" My wife didn't answer immediately. I could picture her standing in the hallway, staring at papers that explained exactly how seriously someone could take being treated like a joke. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller. It's divorce papers." The living room went completely quiet. No wine glasses clinking, no casual chatter, no laughter, just dead silence. "What do you mean, divorce papers?" This was the redhead, the one who usually found everything hilarious. "I mean, my husband is filing for divorce. Are you serious right now? Like actually serious?" My wife's footsteps came back toward the living room. I could hear papers being set down on the coffee table, probably so her friends could see for themselves that this wasn't some misunderstanding. "This has to be a mistake," another voice said. "Why would he file for divorce? You guys seemed fine." "We are fine," my wife said, but her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "We were fine. I don't understand this. When did you last talk to him? Was there a fight?" "No, there wasn't a fight. We've been normal all week. He's been normal." I almost smiled at that. Normal? Like the way she'd been treating me for years was normal. Like humiliating your spouse in front of others was just part of a healthy marriage. "Where is he now?" someone asked. "Upstairs, I think. I need to talk to him." "Wait," the redhead said. "What does it say? What's he claiming as grounds?" There was a pause while she presumably read through the legal language. Irreconcilable differences, emotional abuse, incompatibility. Her voice was getting smaller with each word. "Emotional abuse?" another friend said. That seems extreme. You guys bicker sometimes, but doesn't everyone? This is about last week, my wife said suddenly. It has to be. He got upset about that stupid joke I made about love being blind. The room went quiet again. These women had been in on that joke. They'd laughed along, participated in the group chat afterward, made me a source of entertainment for days. You think he'd file for divorce over one comment? Someone asked, but her voice lacked conviction. It wasn't just one comment, the redhead said quietly. And we all know it wasn't just one comment. What's that supposed to mean? Come on, you guys have been making fun of him for months. We all have. Those group chats, the photos, the stories. Maybe he finally had enough. My wife was quiet for a long moment. I could picture her realizing that her private cruelty hadn't been as private as she'd thought, that maybe, just maybe, someone who'd been treating their marriage like entertainment was now facing real consequences. I need to talk to him, she said finally. I heard her heading for the stairs and moved quietly back to the bedroom. By the time she knocked on the door, I was sitting calmly on the bed, reading. She walked in without waiting for permission, holding the papers in her hand like evidence of some great injustice. "What is this?" she demanded. I looked up from my book. "Legal documents. Don't be smart with me right now. Why are you filing for divorce?" "Because I'm done being married to someone who doesn't respect me." "Over one joke? You're ending our marriage over one stupid joke?" I set my book aside and looked at her directly. "This isn't about one joke. This is about 5 years of being treated like I'm lucky to have you when the truth is you've been lucky to have someone willing to tolerate behavior that no self-respecting person should accept." She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language, like the idea that her actions had consequences was completely foreign to her. "I don't understand. We can work this out. We can go to counseling." "No," I said simply. "We can't." "But I love you." I stood up and walked past her toward the door. "No, you don't, and we both know it." I walked downstairs to find 4 women sitting in stunned silence around divorce papers scattered on my coffee table. The wine glasses sat untouched, the carefully planned evening completely derailed. "Ladies," I said, nodding politely as I headed for the kitchen. The redhead looked up at me with something that might have been respect. "We should probably go," she said to the others. "No, wait," my wife said, rushing down the stairs behind me. "Don't leave. This is just a misunderstanding." But her friends were already gathering their purses. The dynamic had shifted completely. What had been a comfortable space for mocking absent husbands had suddenly become a crime scene where they were all potential witnesses. "Call us tomorrow," one of them said awkwardly, giving my wife a quick hug before heading for the door. Within 5 minutes they were gone, leaving my wife standing alone in the living room with papers that proved her entertainment had finally met its match. "This is insane," she said, following me into the kitchen. "You can't just end a marriage without talking about it first." "I tried talking about it last Thursday. You told me I was being dramatic. That was different. That was just a moment of frustration." I turned to face her. "Show me your phone." "What? Your phone?" "Show me the group chat with your friends." Her face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The Wine Night Girls chat where you shared what you said about me, where you called me stable, but pathetic, where you said I have no options and would get over anything you did to me." She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in our entire relationship, she had no quick comeback, no deflection, no way to make this my fault. "You went through my phone. You left it unlocked with the notifications visible. But that's not the point. The point is that you've been systematically humiliating me for months and you thought I'd never find out or never do anything about it. Those were private conversations between friends, about your husband, in your house, after humiliating me in front of those same friends." She sat down heavily at the kitchen table, finally grasping that her usual tactics weren't going to work. "We can fix this. I'll apologize to the girls. I'll delete the group chat. I'll never say anything like that again." "You're missing the point entirely." "Then explain it to me." I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "The problem isn't that you said these things. The problem is that you believe them. You genuinely think I'm pathetic, that I'm lucky to have you, that I have no self-respect or options. And you know what? You were right about the self-respect part. Until now. I don't think you're pathetic." "Yes, you do. You've spent 5 years testing how much disrespect I tolerate. And every time I failed to set boundaries, you pushed further. You turned our marriage into performance art for your friends because you knew I wouldn't stop you." She was crying now. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who had had their toy taken away and couldn't understand why. "I love you," she said desperately. "I know I mess up sometimes, but I love you." No, you love having someone who makes you feel superior. Someone safe and stable who won't leave no matter how poorly you treat them. That's not love. That's convenience. That's not true. Then tell me one thing you genuinely respect about me. One thing you admire or are proud of that doesn't involve what I do for you or how I make your life easier. She stared at me, mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come. The silence stretched between us until it became its own answer. "I rest my case," I said, standing up. "Where are you going to pack a bag?" "I'll be staying at a hotel until we can work out living arrangements." "You're leaving tonight?" "I left last Thursday. I just didn't move my body until now." She followed me upstairs, alternating between begging and anger, trying every manipulation tactic she'd perfected over 5 years. But something fundamental had changed in me. I could see her techniques, clearly now, like watching a magician whose tricks had been explained. As I packed, she sat on the bed making increasingly desperate promises. Counseling, changes, new attitudes, different friends. Everything except the one thing that might have mattered a week ago: genuine accountability for the person she'd chosen to become. "This is really it?" she asked as I zipped up my suitcase. "You're really going to throw away 5 years over hurt feelings?" I looked at her one final time. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally picking up something valuable that I dropped somewhere along the way." What's that supposed to mean? My self-respect. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new place reading the final divorce decree. Clean break, no drama in court. Everything settled exactly as my attorney had predicted. She tried to drag it out initially, hoping I'd change my mind, but eventually accepted reality when her lawyer explained that her documented pattern of emotional abuse made fighting pointless. The house had sold quickly. We'd split everything down the middle, which left us both financially stable but forced to rebuild separately. She'd moved in with one of her wine night friends temporarily, though I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that most of those friendships had cooled considerably. Apparently, being reminded of your own cruelty by association makes people uncomfortable. My new apartment was smaller but felt infinitely larger. Clean lines, my choice of furniture, no walking on eggshells about what might become material for someone else's entertainment. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, bought things I liked, created a space that reflected who I was, rather than who someone else thought I should be. Work had improved dramatically. Colleagues noticed the change in my energy, my confidence in meetings, my willingness to speak up when I disagreed with decisions. One promotion and several new friendships later, I realized how much space my self-doubt had been occupying in every area of my life. Dating hadn't been a priority, but it had happened naturally. Women responded differently to someone who carried himself with genuine confidence rather than the desperate gratitude of someone who thought he was lucky to be tolerated. The difference was remarkable and eye-opening. My ex-wife had reached out twice since the divorce was finalized. Both times through text, both times with some variation of missing me and making a mistake. I responded politely but briefly, then deleted the conversations. Some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay that way. The real revelation had come 3 months after I'd moved out. A mutual friend mentioned seeing her at a restaurant, complaining loudly to her date about her ungrateful ex-husband who couldn't take a joke. She was already spinning the narrative, making herself the victim of someone else's oversensitivity. It confirmed everything I'd realized about her character. Even losing a marriage hadn't taught her the difference between cruelty and humor, between love and control. She remained committed to the version of reality where other people's reactions to her behavior were the problem, not the behavior itself. That same week, I'd run into the redhead from her friend group at a coffee shop. She'd approached hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable, but determined to say something. "I owe you an apology," she'd said simply. "We all do. What we participated in wasn't okay, and I'm sorry it took your divorce to make that obvious. It was more accountability than my ex-wife had ever shown, and I respected her for it." "Thank you," I'd said. "That means something. For what it's worth, you handled everything with more class than any of us deserved." She was right. I had handled it with class, not because I was trying to be the bigger person, but because I'd finally understood my own worth and acted accordingly. Desperation makes people ugly. Self-respect makes them graceful. Looking back now, I could see the entire pattern clearly. Years of small concessions, Tiny compromises, little moments where I'd chosen peace over principle. Each one had taught her that my boundaries were negotiable, that my dignity was optional, that my feelings were secondary to her entertainment. The Thursday night humiliation hadn't been an aberration. It had been the inevitable conclusion of a relationship where one person's comfort mattered more than the other person's humanity. But it had also been the catalyst for the most important decision I'd ever made, the choice to stop accepting unacceptable treatment, the choice to value myself enough to walk away from someone who didn't. These days, I sleep better, laugh more, and make decisions based on what I want rather than what might avoid conflict. I've learned that respect isn't something you earn by being perfect or grateful or convenient. It's something you command by refusing to accept anything less. My ex-wife taught me something valuable, though not what she intended. She taught me that love without respect is just elaborate manipulation. That someone who truly values you doesn't need an audience to witness your humiliation. That self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential. She'd been right about one thing in that group chat. I really didn't have options back then. But that wasn't because of my appearance or my worth as a person. It was because I hadn't given myself permission to have options. Now I have plenty of options, and the wisdom to choose people who see having me in their life as a privilege, not a punchline.